But I did want to talk about how to promote your podcast guest appearances, because this is something super, super important that I don't think we are doing really well as guests. Now, what do I mean by this? So this week, actually, as of me recording this, I was a guest on my good friend Heather Sager's show. She has the Heather Sager Show, and it was all about really helping people with their message. And I had taken her program and we talked about, what that was like. And it was kind of like a student spotlight. Like I was sharing my story on her podcast, but it got me thinking about this idea of, well, how can I show up as a better guest so I can attract the right kind of guests to my content? This is really where it all stems from, is as podcast host, or maybe, you host a weekly live show and you're looking for guests, like wherever you're looking for guests in your content, I believe that you have to be the model that you are looking for. Because I have noticed over time that as I've raised the standards for how I want to show up as a guest on other people's platform, I've also raised my standards for the type of guest that I want to have in my content, on my podcast, as a guest on my YouTube channel. So I think that this is where we should start, is what are the things that I would want someone to do if they were a guest on my podcast? And a lot of the times, sometimes it's little silly things that I'm like, oh my gosh, it'd be so great if someone took a screenshot of, listening to or screen recording of the actual episode, and they shared it out on Instagram and they tagged me, or they put, a little blurb on, what it was all about. They put it in their Instagram stories, they tagged me, and then they reshared it and all these things. Or I put out a post that says, oh, it was so great to have this person on the podcast. I would go in and comment on it and say, this was so much fun, I can't wait. And then I would reshare that to my story. Or I could send an email to my list and say, hey, it was so fun chatting with Heather Sager on her podcast this week. Make sure you go listen to it. There's a lot of ways that you can really kind of cheer up the content that you're participating in as a partner, as a collaborator, as a guest. And I think that we're kind of missing the mark when we aren't doing a good job promoting other people's stuff. Because it's the worst, y'all. It is the worst whenever you have someone come into your content and they do a great job, right? They do the bare minimum, which is show up, speak in complete sentences, add value to your audience, and be on time. Let's be really honest. These are some of the bare minimum things that people should be doing if they are guesting in your content. But I'm looking for the 7 or 8 things that are above and beyond. And for me, that is those social posts where they're engaging with the content, or they're sending an email to their list and they're talking about it on multiple different platforms. If I post on LinkedIn, then they're like, oh my gosh, this was so much fun. And I put something on Instagram, they reshare it, and then they engage with my audience. These are all things that I would love to have in a guest that comes onto my show. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to model the behavior that I want to see in someone else that's going to be a guest in my content. So I want you to think about this. When you're thinking about how can I attract the right type of guest for my content, you have to model it. You have to do that above and beyond. And maybe you're like, Crystal, that sounds like a lot of work. I don't have time for that. That sounds like a lot of work. Well, I believe that these should be the bare minimum requirements for you to be a guest in other people's content. It shouldn't be, oh, I want to be on this one podcast because they could get me in front of a new crowd and maybe get, they're going to share about it on their Instagram and they're going to talk about me and they're going to do all the, it's me, 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 me. Super selfish, very ego-centered. And I don't love that idea. So what I would want you to, because people come to me, y'all. I've talked about podcast pitches, and I have several podcast episodes with friends who are in the podcast pitching space. Like there's one that May Kay sang and I did in particular where we talked about, like, we went on some rants about podcast pitches gone wrong and how to not pitch people. But anybody that starts off with, I'm so amazing, and this is why you should have my amazing self in your content, it gets deleted or it goes unread or it just like I put it in the spam folder. Like there's a lot of different things that happen to those pitches, but I never want someone to have that reaction to me whenever I'm sending out a guest appearance pitch. So these are the things that I want you to think about. I've been talking a lot recently about pay attention to your own consumer behavior habits. Meaning, if you get an email from somebody and you're like, oh, that's slimy, I don't want to talk to that person, pay attention to that. And then realize, oh, if you're sending emails that way, they probably have that same reaction to whenever you do it. But also, if you have a guest that comes into your content and you're like, oh my gosh, like they shared it like 7 times and then they engaged in the comments with all of my audience and then they did this and they did that. Like I would love to have them back on the show. That's really what I'm going for. Whenever I've been a guest in someone's content, I'm like, man, I hope that they ask me back because it's a lot easier to be a recurring guest and get in front of this audience more than once and have them convert over to a listener of yours, a raving fan of yours, join your Facebook group, get on your email list, whatever it is that you're trying to do. And so I think it's important that we think about how can I show up in a way that's going to impact this audience, add so much value that the host is saying, I cannot wait to have you back on the show. This was incredible. Like, let's collaborate in the future. And I can't wait for you to have that experience where you have someone that's so amazing come on to your content to where you're telling them, I cannot wait to have you back on the show. And you just get really excited about a collaboration or a partnership. And who knows what other kind of opportunities could be available for you in the future whenever you stay open to those possibilities. So, mic drop, like that's my rant on showing up at other people's content. I want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence as guests and we are paying attention to the type of guests that we want to have in our content and we're modeling those behaviors.